Hey guys, my name's Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with Logic Pro. And today I have to say thank you guys so much. I don't know if you could probably tell what I'm thanking you about, but it's actually, if you just stop for a second and look, you might be able to tell. We're finally in full HD. Okay, so thank you guys so much. Really, your support has been it has been really what made it so I could get this. So you guys might not know, but when you watch my videos, that actually supports me. So thank you guys so much for all your support and watching my videos and just kind of going through the series, enjoying it, interacting, asking me questions, and then kind of sharing your thoughts as well and telling me some things that I didn't notice. Thank you guys so much. It has really been so awesome that not only has this kind of happened so much that you guys have really been supportive, but also to the point to where now you could really see how your guys' support really affects me. So thank you guys so much. You could tell, like I said, we're 1080p now, and I'm no longer on my old screen. And I actually did a comparison. Apparently my old screen has about from here, a box about that big. So I gained a lot of screen space in that one, but even more so, you guys don't have the nasty black bars on the sides. So so that's a really cool thing, and thank you guys so much for that. And then on another note, this is a track by Dava. He sent me it, and it's called Club Life. So he sent it. It's like, hey man, you interested in doing a master for this? And I was like, sure, I'll do this for you. So I'll kind of give you a little listen on the track, and then we'll get into today's video, which is on limiting. So we'll just listen to it a little bit, just so you kind of get a feel for the track, and then from there we'll kind of start working on the track. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the track sounds like. Sorry, I just accidentally mashed a button on my keyboard while turning up the volume. So without further ado, if I can stop clipping here. Okay, there we go. Without further ado, let's get started on today's video. So today I'm talking about limiting, and I told you guys that I was going to start using limiter 6 somewhere around here. And I kind of gave you the link, told you guys to download it in the first video of the series. And once again, if you're new to the series, you're just kind of hopping in for this video because you saw, oh, cool, this guy did a video on limiting for mastering, so what the heck, let me check it out. I'm doing a full little series here that kind of talks about mastering, and it'll give you an overview of the general process. So we're actually not going to go to limiter number 6 yet, but we are going to use that in this episode. First, we're going to go to dynamics, adaptive limiter, and then we're also going to add dynamics limiter. So these are the two main limiters that come with Logic. Actually, there are a few other ones, just in case you were wondering why I said main. Inside the compressor, there is a limiter, and then I think there may be one other limiter somewhere in here. The expander is kind of like a limiter, but not really. It's just kind of, this is an interesting tool, but we're not going to use it for this video or any of the mastering videos, really, because Logic's expander isn't all that great. So what's a limiter? If you don't remember from when I first talked about dynamics, a limiter is basically a faster version of a compressor that has a very hard knee. So if we go and we bring in a compressor here, it's basically, if we go to the graph, you'll see here that we could change the ratio on a compressor so that it kind of bends down and it compresses more or less. So if we set the ratio all the way to 1, it's not doing any compression. So as the volume level goes up, it allows it to reach that level and just kind of goes up to where it needs to be. Whereas if you increase the ratio, you basically create a point to where it can go up to here, but then it can't go to louder levels. It's kind of just squashed down. And then we adjust it even more so with a threshold. So that's kind of what we're doing with this, except for if you turn the knee all the way down, you kind of see even more so, this is more what we're doing. With the limiter, we're kind of keeping it from reaching a certain point. So at this point, we have it at negative 24.5. So if we were to actually do something with this, what would happen is it would prevent anything from going over negative 24.5, because that's where we stick the ratio in, and we have the ratio up to the maximum value, so it's really doing a lot of compression. That's what a limiter basically is. Except you notice that they're missing a lot of the tools that the compressor has. So in the case of the regular limiter here, we have the gain, the look ahead, the release, and the output level. What's the look ahead? Well, the look ahead is kind of like when doing the guesswork for the compression. How far do I look ahead? So you could kind of increase it or decrease it. That kind of adjusts the tone a little bit. And then the release is, once again, it's just like the release in the compressor. Turning it up makes it, when it starts to compress, it makes it take longer to go down than if you have a short release. So that's what that does. And soft knee is kind of like you saw when we had the compressor open. We could have it so it kind of gradually curved. Let me bring it back up one more time. We could have it so it could gradually curve here, like that, or we could turn the knee all the way down and it's sharp. So that's our two options here. Soft knee is on or off, and then that's basically it. And then we have the output level, which is kind of like the threshold. It's where the point where it won't let it go past. And we have some different modes down here, which you could kind of choose to your whatever you want. But my suggestion is actually probably don't use Logic's built-in limiter for mastering. In my experience, I could not ever get a good tone with the built-in limiter. But why am I showing you this? Because I kind of want to show you two different types of limiters here. So I got the first one here that I was kind of talking about, explaining all the different things. And then we have the adaptive limiter, which is drastically different. We have input scale, gain, and out ceiling. There are some other tools down here, but they don't really do much by way of the actual sound itself. So what we have here is basically this input scale is kind of like a gain sort of thing. So it's not actually gain, but it basically takes it and kind of it behaves similarly to gain. This is actual gain, which has more of a tone effect than this one does. This one's more so just kind of like, okay, we want the track louder, so kind of measure it from a louder point. Whereas this one, actually, let me reset that. This one down here is more so bring up the level and kind of actually boost it. So realistically, this one's kind of like plus or minus gain, and this one's basically just plus gain. So it's why they have two is kind of just for convenience sake, so you can scale things up and down a little bit better. But it's you probably won't worry too much about those settings. So that means our only other setting here is the out ceiling, which is basically the same as the output level, which is basically the same as the threshold, the point where it kind of won't let anything pass. So this one has very few settings, and this one is a little bit more flexible because it has the release here and the look ahead. So the question is, why did they do that? And the answer is this. There are two types of limiting: soft and hard. And they are pretty much as the name entails. If you have a soft limiter, it's going to be adjusting the volume level by looking at the signal, and kind of just like when it gets to here and you see this little peak here, it'll start to turn down the volume. That's what it bases the look ahead off of that. And what it can do is, if you extend the look ahead, it kind of looks farther ahead, and it could do more intelligent things. Whereas if you reduce the look ahead, it has to do more instantaneous things. It has to kind of follow it very closely instead of look from here to here. That's an exaggeration, but from here to here and see, okay, up here we're gonna have this huge peak, so I should start decreasing the volume early. That's what increasing the look ahead kind of does. Whereas if you just have a really short look ahead, it's just kind of like, okay, so there's a peak there, and then there's a peak there, and then there's a peak there, and whoa, we have a peak here. Okay, so that's what it does with a lower look ahead. So this one it's a lot more flexible with the tone, and at the same time it tends to be softer because you can let it look ahead and kind of see some of the audio that's coming, and then kind of shape its decisions based on that. So it's a lot smoother sounding, and it'll round out your sound a lot more. That's why I don't like using this limiter for mastering. But it is something to keep in mind. There are better soft limiters out there, but this one is a soft limiter, and it's just something to keep in mind. It has a very heavy impact on the tone. And it usually is in the form of reducing the high end and kind of softening the high end out. So that's what the soft limiter does. Now, the hard limiter, on the other hand, which is in this case is called the adaptive limiter, What this one does is it does a combination of two things. And one of the things it does is it reduces volume. You can kind of see here, it has a look ahead as well. And if you look here, this one has a maximum look ahead of 10, and this one has a maximum look ahead of 200 milliseconds. So that's 0.2 seconds basically. And this one, on the other hand, has only 0.01 second look ahead. So this one you can look ahead a lot farther, but at the same time, this one does something else. This one can actually take your signal, and if it can't turn it down in time, it'll actually clip it. And while it may seem like a bad thing, it's actually kind of good, you'll find out. When I get into limiter 6, this will really start to make a lot of sense. So this one, in turn, it has a lot less of an impact on the tone. It kind of just feels like it's pulling things up, but at the same time, this one is more prone to sounding distorted. This one is more prone to sounding overcompressed, because this one's just changing the volume, and this one's changing the volume and kind of distorting at the same time. So that's the two of them. We have the soft one and the hard one, and now it really makes sense. This one's kind of distorting and doing volume changes. This one's just doing volume changes, so it really makes a lot of sense. So we could do this, limiter, and then this one will be the adaptive limiter. So that's kind of just a little tabby, keep that in mind. And now we could actually get into limiter number 6. Now I've kind of explained to you limiters. I know I talked about them before in my my dynamics video, but that was a long time ago, and I don't remember how much I covered, how much I didn't cover. So, but that's the rundown for these two types of limiters. Now, I sometimes use adaptive limiter for mastering, but I really don't use this regular limiter. Now, one thing to keep in mind is one of the reasons I don't like it is probably because I only used L4 to L9, and I never tried these other modes, which LX ISP, I don't know what LX stands for, but I know ISP stands for inter-sample precise. And that means, that basically, inter-sample peak, sorry. Inter-sample peak. And what that means is kind of, it's when you're taking the audio and changing it from digital to analog, aka when you go from the ones and zeros on your hard drive into actually going out your speakers, ISP apparently helps make that transition a little bit smoother. So that's, changing those might get you a better tone, but for the sake of this video, I'm not going to really cover this limiter because I haven't been able to get anything good out of it, and I don't want to try to push it when I know that I could actually get something good with something else. So now here comes the next plugin. So I'm getting rid of those, and we're going to go into limiter number 6. This is a great limiter. It's got a really good tone if you know how to use it, and it also has some pretty good presets as well. So we have a whole bunch of things here, but you kind of see that they could be cut down into various sections. We have a compressor here, we have a peak limiter here, we have a high frequency limiter, a clipper, and protection. So what do all these do, and why do we have so many in here? This compressor is an RMS compressor. I already talked about RMS compression. If you're new to the series, I suggest you go back and check out that video because I'm not going to recover it here because that'll take a long time to recover. But essentially, so we have the gain, the ratio, the attack, the release. Those are all things that you're used to. The dry mix, you're used to that as well. So how much dry or wet do you want? And then as well as this little thing, which is kind of new. So we have normal, MS, and off. Now, so the interesting thing about this is I wasn't sure what MS was for a while, but I did know it changed the tone. So what I did was I went in and actually checked out the manual. I usually don't do this for stuff, but I figured if I'm going to do a video on this, and I really, I want to give you guys as much information by way of mastering as possible, because that's one of the things that I want you guys to kind of learn for yourself, because like I said, I'm not very good at mastering. I just know what I know, and I'm not like too good at the sound aspect of it and getting a great tone. I can just do a master because I know kind of what I'm doing. So what I figured out this is the MS stands for mono stereo. And what that basically means is that we have two different tracks here that are kind of monitored. So we have the mono track and the stereo track, and the way this works in compression terms, sorry if I was kind of distracted for a second there. I kind of lost my train of thought. But anyway, so we have mono and stereo are viewed separately. And what that means, we kind of get the sum of the two sides. You'll actually look here, we have 1, 2 things here, and sometimes they have slightly different things. If you look right here, you'll see this kind of has a peak there and a peak there, and this one has peaks that are slightly lower relative to it. So they're kind of like right there. It's kind of like a smooth thing. Well, this one peaks up a lot more. So the mono is when you get the sum of both of those and you stick it together. And the stereo is when you view these separately. So what it does is it actually compresses based on both of those. And it kind of, if I switch it here, you'll see it has two things. And if I pull this up, they move separately. So what happens is it kind of separates those two different things and kind of uses it to compress so that it gets a smoother compression. So that's what that is. But otherwise, you just have the normal compressor, which is what you're used to, and or you could just turn it off. So I'm going to turn this off right now, just for the sake of focusing on limiters. And now we're going to get into all of these. So peak limiter. What's a peak limiter? It's just like the this is basically the soft limiter. Now, that said, there are different things here. We could do brick wall, soft, mono stereo, or multiband. So these are pretty self-explanatory. Brick wall is basically hard. So I should actually write that here just to kind of give you an idea. Brick wall. And that one, once again, I said it gives a lot harsher sound, whereas soft gives a lot softer sound. So the high end kind of sounds brighter and crispier with harder brick wall. Whereas with the soft limiters, it tends to sound, the high end tends to sound smoother. And mono and stereo is kind of like if you get, it sounds like the soft limiter, except it's a lot smoother and a lot less prone to sounding over compressed, which is a great thing to keep in mind. So if you're trying to do a soft limiter and it just kind of sounds like things are kind of going or kind of like rumbly somewhere in it, then, and it's not distorting, because there's a difference between compression and distortion that you'll eventually hear. And then usually you want to switch it to mono stereo, because that's basically, this one's kind of like mono and this one's mono stereo. So, so that's kind of just to keep in mind there. And then multiband is the final one, which is basically like a multiband compression version of limiting, except this one only has 3 bands, and I can show you here. So we have 1, 2, 3. Can't really see the red one moving all that much, but that's no big deal. So we have just basically those 3 sections: highs, mids, and lows. I believe the way they lined it up is RGB. So the red one is the lows, the green one is the mids, and the blue one is the highs, just in case you want to know. So essentially we have the threshold, the gain. Those ones are the same from the other limiters, but then we have a whole bunch of other ones. So we have, first of all, linked and unlinked and off for this peak limiter, and I can't believe I forgot what that was. 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. So now I had forgotten, because it's kind of a subtle thing here. Linked means you essentially limit the bass in mono. Unlinked means you limit the bass in stereo, and off means off. So that's what that tool is here. I covered this tool, and now I'm going to kind of go into clockwise thing here. I should have started from the top, but we have A to C. Essentially, A is harsher, C is softer. So it's kind of, when you go into these various things, you could adjust the tonalities of them even more by going from A to C. So once again, A is harsh, C is soft. Now, for the sake of EDM, I'll talk about which ones to use later, but right now I'm just going to try to plow through the different settings here so you kind of get it. So this is speed, normal speed, half speed, and 1/3 speed. So that's basically the attack and release are kind of not very adjustable. The type is kind of changing the attack and release, so so that's the only way you're really adjusting it, other than the speed. The speed is, you basically normally have it to normal setting, which is where it runs at the regular speed. Half speed is half the speed, so it's slower, and then 1/3 speed is 1/3 the speed. So so it's a lot smoother by way of the limiting, instead of a harsh, very fast limiter. It kind of slows things down a little. Okay, so then we have a high frequency limiter, which has one setting really. That's the threshold, which is basically how much do you want to limit the high end. If you're having trouble with the high end, too much high end, everything's sounding really really airy and a little bit too crispy and sharp, then you'll want to use this, but usually I just set it to off. And then we have the clipper, which is basically, it's kind of like a distortion unit and a limiter in the same thing. So once again, we have two different types of things. We could have this, so we have off and on, then we have different upsample settings, which is basically off is no upsampling. GR, I think, I don't remember exactly. I think that just does the clipping to or upsampling, sorry, to the extreme peaks, or it has something to do with if you're running at 48 kilohertz. But normally, if you're going to turn on upsampling, you'll set it to signal, so it's doing the full thing. And if that's the case, then you'll also notice there's a big tonal difference, and this one will smooth things out as well. So I'm just going to leave that to off for now. And then the clipper, you can see that we have the gain threshold, and those are kind of explanatory. How much do you want to pull it up, and as well as where do you want to start the distortion at. And it's distortion limited, like I was saying. So don't think that it's just a distortion unit that's just going to kill your audio files. It actually doesn't. So then we could go into the knee here, which is basically how drastically do we kick in the distortion. So do we want things to be, do we want it to like start clipping really hard, really fast, or do we want to gradually clip more and more as it gets over the threshold? So that's kind of what you're doing there. And then once again, we have mode here. We could do normal, mono stereo, or multiband. Typically, I just set this to multiband, but it's up to you. And then finally, we have protection, which is basically like a final brick wall limiter or a digital clip. So digital clip, ISP fast and ISP precise. Like I said, ISP is inter-sample peak. And if you set this to fast or precise, either one is basically just gonna be doing a limiter here. But if you set it to digital clip, it'll actually be distorting it. So we've talked a lot about tools here. How do they actually come in use? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to set this to their default mastering one, just because it makes things easier to work with. I'm going to turn off the compressor, and then I'm going to add a little gain here so I can kind of adjust the gain just a little bit before I start setting it into, you know what, I'll just use the gain of the limiter. Okay, so one other thing I want to touch on really quick here is there are some other options. Up here you kind of see there's text you could switch. I don't suggest messing around with these too much just because they're kind of set where they need to be. Everything's in stereo, so we want stereo. We don't want everything stuck in mono. Fixed latency has to do with basically running the mode that is better for audio quality, and then compressor limiter is kind of the way we're usually doing things by way of mastering, so we'll kind of leave it as is. And this 1x 4x thing here is kind of like the smoothing when it comes to the upsampling. So when you go to upsample the signal, if you set it to 4x, it'll kind of smooth out this clipper a little bit. So that's just something that's up to you. It's kind of a stylistic thing. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into this. And actually, I kind of forgot to mention in my intro, limiting is really where the mastering becomes what you know mastering as. So in the previous videos, I was just kind of talking about compression and stuff and setting up your project and everything like that, and everything to prep for the real mastering phase. This is basically the biggest part of the mastering phase that most people notice, and that's pulling up the volume. So that we go from this to something that looks like a mastered track where everything's kind of smashed up at the top and looks really loud and big. So that's what mastering, like this is the main tool that brings our idea of mastering together. And that's what these wonderful limiters do. So I'm going to get in, I'm just going to show you kind of how to go in and work with these couple of tools. I should turn off the high frequency limiter first, and I'll go through and kind of tweak things and show you guys the deal with working with these different tools and why they actually make a difference. And you're not just having one limiter on there. It'll make a lot of sense in a bit, but for now, I'll just kind of show you. So I'm going to start working at this area right here. This looks like a good spot. I'm going to cycle from here to here. Why am I choosing right here? It's actually a very good question. I'm glad you asked. The reason I'm choosing to go right here is because this is the loudest part of the track. Now, I could alternatively go start over here where this is technically the loudest part. If you look, that peaks a little bit higher than this. But that's not that big of a deal because that's something that's going to be rounded out by the compression. But I'm not doing compression in this video. I'm going to do some full masters in later videos, but for now I just kind of want to talk about limiters. And this video is going to be pretty long, so I apologize for that. There's just a lot to cover by way of limiters. And I don't think it'd be good to split it up into 2 episodes just because everything goes hand in hand and you really need to not lose any of the information. So what I'm going to start to do here is I'm going to actually start to pull this up. I'm just going to take the gain and pull it up until we start to hit 0 here. So we'll play this back and kind of mute myself, and I'll start to pull it up. It'd help if I turned it on. Okay, so I'm going to actually add a gain plugin in really quick because I'm pulling up that gain right there on the limiter number 6 quite a bit. So I'm going to pull this up by 6, and I think that's good. I think it's peaking at negative 6.1, so I could pull that up to 6, and that'll be probably more than I need. But because that's the peak regions, I'm not too worried about those right now because I haven't done any compression really. And I'm not going to do compression right now. So here we go. So we have this. Now I can turn this down, and you'll notice it's actually peaking at negative 0.3. That's because that's what the final protector is set to, negative 0.3. Okay, so you could already tell it's actually sounding pretty good. We have this at negative 0.3, so I'm going to do a couple things here. First of all, I'm going to take the ceiling, and I'm just going to pull it up all the way. You'll notice it's on digital clip. I choose that because I prefer digital clip for EDM. This is where really it's partially my style, partially what you kind of hear in a lot of EDM tracks. A lot of EDM tracks are heavy, punchy, and bright. So I prefer to use digital clip instead of the various limiting things. I like to distort instead of smooth things out, just because that gives a lot of brightness to the track while retaining the clarity. Whereas if you do a lot of smoothing and stuff, you'll actually kill a lot of the dynamics that are really well known in EDM, and a lot of the punchiness and brightness. Now, in other styles of music, like if you're doing bluegrass or you're doing, I don't know, maybe tropical house, you might actually want to use a smoother styles of limiting and stuff like that. But a lot of like traditional styles of music that are recorded usually use smoother sounds, so that they sound a lot more analog and they don't sound as harsh and clippy as EDM usually tends to sound. So that's why I have that at digital clip. But anyway, you can tell here we have a couple settings going on right now. So with this preset, it was set to multi-band, so that's a good thing. The threshold was set to kind of here, and that's actually probably wouldn't be my first choice, but it works. And then we have the type here is set to C, speed is set to normal, peak limiter is set to linked, and that's basically what we want because we want all the sub to be compressed the same. So everything under 100 hertz needs to be compressed in mono instead of stereo. So that's what we'll do with the linked there, if you remember. But actually for the type, I want to set this to A. My favorite use of this type is always A, just because A always seems brighter and punchier to me. C sounds smoother, and like I said, I don't like smooth. I like everything to be crisp and punchy. So I'm setting that to A. Now, there are a couple things you could do here. You could choose which tone you want more. I'm going to set it to multiband because that's really where this limiter shines. This limiter is really good at doing multiband limiting. So we have everything running that's basically pulled up our volume level and kept it from peaking at the same time. So if I had just pulled everything up it's basically at positive 12 now, so I kind of show you. But if I run this at positive 12, watch what happens on the master bus. It peaks quite a bit, despite the fact that it is just as loud as when we run the limiter. It peaks. Now, when I run the limiter, it doesn't. So that's what mastering does. Instead of just pulling up your volume to the right volume level, it actually makes your track go sound a lot louder than its potential maximum volume level if you just scaled up the gain. And it allows it to sound, like I said, it sound a lot louder, and that's kind of what we're focusing on. So there are some other things that we'll do with EQ that really tie into that and help it sound even louder. But like I said, I'm not going to cover that in this video because this video is on limiting and there's already a lot to cover. So I've gone in and I've done this peak limiter. What else can I do? Now is actually the point where I would go in and I'd start to rein in the clipper. So we have the knees about halfway, the upsampling's on signal there, so it's kind of just running that. I'm not going to set this to 4 times because 4 times kind of smooths it out by way of the clipper. I'll just kind of leave it as is, and then we have this set to normal. We'll kind of see how this sounds, but I'm actually going to pull this up as far as I can, and then when it starts distorting, I'm going to pull it back down, and we're actually going to try, actually before I pull it down, we're going to try switching to the different modes. So we'll just take a listen here, and then we'll mess around with some of the settings. Okay, so I got to stop here to say one thing really quick. Listen to the low end. If you can hear the low end when I set it to normal, it kind of sounds like it's being, like I was saying, the sound that's really signature of when you're trying to master something and you're doing it wrong is there's a sound that kind of sounds like right in the low end or in the high end or various parts of your mix. Right now, it's most obvious in the low end for this particular track. Like I said, a lot of things depend on the track that you're doing, so you'll want to change a lot of these settings. You can't just have a catch-all master that'll work with every track for your entire life. So this is actually just a case for this track. The low end seems to be getting the worst of it. So if you listen to the low end, you'll kind of hear the kick drum kind of sounds almost like it's distorting, but it's like a softer distortion. So you could tell there when we set it to multiband instead of normal, a lot of that distortion goes away. So that's why I don't like this to be set to normal. Usually I do a lot of multiband limiting with this because, like I said, that's where this limiter shines. It is a multiband limiter and it does a great job at it. Now, if you notice mono stereo, it does actually sound better than normal, but multiband sounds a little bit better than mono stereo. So I'm just going to set this to multiband. Most of the time, just FYI, I do use multiband, and A. That's pretty much what I start everything with, but the blend of these is going to be very different. So I kind of dialed this one in until the point where it felt like it was squashing things. Then I just brought it back a little bit. Now this one, I need to pull it back until it sounds like, pull it up until it sounds like it's distorting things. So we're going to listen here, and I'm going to have to pull it down just a little bit, and then I might do one final thing here. So you can still hear in the low end that it is doing some distortion. So we could do a couple things here. First of all, we could tweak the knee, but I will just mess with that, see what that does. That sounds good. That sounds to where it's about the point where it's not really sounding like it's distorting, but it's still nice and loud. So when I turned down the knee there, you could tell when I turned it up, things got distorted a lot faster. This one kind of smooths out the distortion a little bit more so that it's not as sensitive to volume changes. So then we move on to the final stage, which is protection. Now we can set this to digital clip, ISP fast, or ISP precise. I'm going to try this on digital clip first. It might not actually sound good with this track unless I EQ it. I am going to EQ this later because I'm going to be doing a full master of this later. But for now, I might actually switch it to ISP instead of digital clip because we might be able to get more loudness out of it and it might just sound better for the track. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to pull up the final output on this one and kind of see how things go. Note, keep in mind, this meter does squat. You have to watch the light when it's on digital clip. If you set it to ISP fast or precise, the meter actually starts to move around. But when you have it on digital clip, you have to watch the light to see how much work it's doing. So that's about as far as we could push it with the digital clip. If we go up any higher than that, it starts to sound distorted. So we'll try this out. We'll switch it to intersample precise intersample peak precise. And then we're going to go just try to pull up the gain just a little bit more. See if it affects the tone adversely. We'll kind of switch between them just to kind of A-B it. But first, we're going to check to see if we can pull it up more with this. I lied. I could hear that instantaneously when I started playing this. I knew instantly I'm going back to digital clip, because this one, if you couldn't tell, it really things started to sound distorted in the low end, and it really wasn't good sounding anymore, and it cut out some of the high end as well. So that's why I prefer digital clip. It makes things sound more open and punchy. This one makes things sing kind of a little bit more squashed sounding. Like I said, it depends a lot on the genre and what your preferences are, but in the case of most EDM, you'll want things to be bright and punchy. So whenever you have the chance, set things to distort and or clip rather, and or multi-band instead of soft everything, because soft stuff just smooths everything out. So that's pretty much it that we're gonna do with limiter 6. Now, this is where things get interesting. So you'll notice I said there's a whole bunch of tools here. They're all doing different things. I could actually get another limiter. This is one I just recently found. It's a clone of the Waves W1 limiter that someone made, and it's apparently really close to that other limiter, which cost a couple $100 if I recall correctly. And to the point to where this is free, so just get it. I mean, it's really good, and it's not copyright violation. Someone actually just tried to make a limiter that sounded like it had a similar tone. So that's what we have going on here, and we could actually go and add this on top of our limiter number 6, and we could potentially pull up the volume level even louder. So you'll notice this is a limiter that looks a lot like the adaptive limiter, because we have the adaptive release here, which kind of just sets that to a predefined setting, and it just kind of lets it go. Then we have the ceiling and the threshold. So it's kind of like a mix between the soft and the hard limiter, and this one has a very obvious tone. It might sound good on this track, but I'm just kind of showing you guys for the sake of showing you that when you slap on different limiters, you could actually boost the volume a little bit more. So I'll turn it off first, and I'll pop it on, and then we'll start to turn down the threshold, which this one is a different threshold. Instead of squashing things, this threshold pulls things up. So it's kind of like everything. This is kind of like the gain, basically. This is the gain, and it's inverse, so as you pull it down, the gain goes up, and this is the ceiling, which is kind of more like the threshold. So anyway, we'll check this out here, and then actually turn it off first, and we'll turn it on, and then start switching things around. So that should be a little explanation there as to why I said we have so many different limiters. We tried to pull it up with each one of these, and each one, little by little, brought up the volume level. This one here, on the other hand, when we got to here, and we could only bring it up just a tiny bit, and before it started to sound distorted. This one we could bring it up by an intelligent 2.4 decibels, and the reason I say intelligent is because it's not always that number. It's kind of it's rather flexible, and it's just pulling it up a little bit. So we're kind of just working in a little bit more limiting here while trying to retain the original sound and not getting distortion and clipping and stuff like that. So we have basically 1, 2, 3, 4 types of limiters or limiters distortion or distortion units that are basically changing. Let's see if I could do this here. So what we'll do here is we'll add a gain here. Utility gain. So we're going to set this to +12, just because That's to the point where it's about peaking kind of showed. And we'll A-B the two different things. So this is when it's just being boosted. And if we go through and switch them, that, my dear friends, is mastering in a nutshell. You see, when we just pulled up the gain, we got it louder, but it was clipping. When we got this little bit of gain here, and then we started adding our couple of limiters on, then what happened was not only are we no longer peaking, but it's louder than we just boosted the gain. So that's really what like the core thing of mastering that you're used to hearing. And that's what you're looking for in your tracks. And you say, my tracks are so quiet, but I like normalized them and I tried to bring them up and stuff like that. That's what you need to do. So this is the limiting. If you do nothing else for your master, you'd probably just limit. So that's really, you might think, oh, you should have just started with this tool. I didn't want to start with this tool because this tool is very, the order of operations go compression first and then limiting. You kind of tell by the way the fact that the compressor is right here. So I wanted to cover those first because you want to dial in good dynamics and compression before you start to squash things with a limiter. So I wanted to kind of put emphasis on how a compressor plays its role in smoothing out the track and adding some dynamics at the same time. And then a limiter here just brings up the volume level. So there are a lot of limiters out there, and it's great to have a whole bunch of options because I'll show you right now. If I turn off this W1 limiter and switch to dynamics, adaptive limiter, I could actually probably bring it up a little bit more than before. Okay, this track is not actually coping well with this particular limiter, and you want to know why? This one is more focused on limiting by way of soft limiting, and this one's more focused on limiting by way of volume and distortion. Like I said, this is a brick wall or a hard limiter. This one's a soft one. This particular track is not coping well with the hard limiting. So in this particular case, so this one is actually not doing a good tone. So it's good that I had this W1 limiter to kind of slap as a final limiter just to kind of smooth things out just a little bit more and bring things up. Not smooth things out. Sorry, that's not what I meant to say. Just bring things up a little bit more and yet retain a good sound. So that's really, it shows you a whole lot about why it's good to have multiple types of limiters, and as well as, you know, basically why we stack things so much and we kind of pick and choose what different limiters we have. So now, just if you were to get one go-to limiter, that would kind of just be catch-all for so many things. In the EDM world, it'd have to be Ozone. Ozone is by far the most popular limiter for mastering, and there is a good reason for that. It is a great limiter. I've only gotten to use it a little bit, but it is very good sounding and it does do a great job. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. If you want to invest in a good mastering tool, Isotope Ozone is really good, really popular, and that's the one to look at. But if you just want free tools to do mastering, then you could use Logic's built-in ones, or you could use W1 limiter, or you could use limiter number 6. And I'll try to have links for all of those in the description here, and so you could grab all of those and just use them to your heart's content. So that really basically sums up everything that I need to talk about in today's video. But really, you could really see here, this is where the rubber meets the road for mastering. The limiting is what really gets that mastered sound where everything's big and powerful and full and heavy, instead of just being, you know, a little bit louder. It actually really adds to it. So that's what we're doing here. Now, I could have gone into more depth about the various controls and what they really do, the technicalities, but you don't need to know. Just listen for each one. Like I said, each one has a different tone. In some cases, you'd actually want to check if you're getting a little bit of distortion. That sounds like it'd be coming from this area. And the reason you could tell is because if there are these like sounds of distortion that are kind of coming in when you have like a nice smooth sub rolling. And this light is kind of flashing in time with those bits, then what you do is you turn down the output on this one so that it wouldn't be hitting that digital clip, and then maybe you turn it up here. So so that's where you kind of figure out where the problem areas are and kind of work with them. So you know, each one of these tools, it's a little bit sad that, you know, you can't just kind of A/B each one, kind of like, you know, just pull it out, put it in. You can do that, but the fact that they're all in one tool kind of makes it a little more it makes it a little more out of your way to kind of separate things and actually go turn this off and then back to linked and off and back to link, just to kind of get things caught up. You know, you get caught up in the fact that this is all one tool and your brain doesn't really separate things as easily as if you have multiple tools. But at the same time, you do kind of need to troubleshoot, figure out which compressor is doing the part that you don't like in terms of mastering, and which which limiter is doing the part you don't like, and which one is doing the part that you need to add a little bit more of. So you kind of go through and sort through and find each one and kind of tune it to the perfect value so you get good loudness. Now, if you only use one of these limiters, you will be very limited, mind the pun, with how loud you could get. But as you stack these different limiters and distortion things, you could really pull it up just a little bit more. So that's, you know, like I said, that covers a lot of really everything you need to know. Just like the various things like the 1 times, 4 times, the upsampling sounds, and what's the difference between mono, stereo, multiband, soft, and brick wall. I want you guys to really go in, especially A to C, listen to the tones for yourself for that. But actually, you know what? I'll A/B this. You might be able to catch it, but it's going to be something you need to spend more time on your tracks because you're kind of used to your tracks. Spend more time on your tracks listening to it so you could really hear the difference. So when I have this on A, the high synth, that's that one is basically, it opens up more on A, and C, it kind of gets dropped into the background. So it's very, very subtle there. And that's why I want you guys to kind of try out these things, spend a lot of time working with them, and really hash it out. Just, you know, I could explain when to use everything, but that's not going to give you as much knowledge as if you know the tones and you know why you would want to use something instead of just what it does and what kind of sound it gets. So experiment around, try the different types of modes, try the different types here, adjust the knee, figure out what that does to the tone for you, and go, you know, switch between multiband, mono, stereo, and normal mode for the clipper as well, and just try different ones. And really learn their sounds and learn how to use them. Because like I said, I could give you the head knowledge. I did that. I gave you all the head knowledge you could possibly need for this plugin. And essentially all that's left is for you to take that head knowledge and turn it into artistic knowledge. And really apply it to your tracks instead of just, you know, applying it to the plugin. So you know, you're using these things artistically, not just mathematically. Don't think, oh, my track is electro house, so I need to set to this, and I should be good. Actually try things out, experiment around. If you can't get quite a good tone from multiband, set it to mono stereo. Just go around. Like I said, it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of practice to really get used to hearing the different tones of mastering. Now, one thing I want to comment on is you can probably tell whenever I play this back first, it starts to sound distorted. But then it eases into a good tone. I'm not worried, because if I were doing compression before this, it'd smooth out this peak right here, and this peak would be more around these areas. So my tone would be like this. Now, one final thing before I go, which is kind of like a thing you need to remember, is despite the fact that I'm working in this area, I do need to check that my master works over here. Now, if you have a electro house drop and it sounds, you're doing a lot of clipping and limiting on it, especially using distortion and the digital clip. If you're using those ones a lot and you have like an electro house drop, it's going like da 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 da, and you might get that reference, but and it's running, sounds really nice here, and then you go to like this part that has like this sub that's just kind of going duh, and you got a pad going, and maybe it starts to sound distorted. That's because you are going only for this drop region and you didn't check the break region, which has a lot smoother sounds, but when they're run through the distortions, they don't sound good. So that means you'd have to tone down the distortion. So that's why you have to kind of go to different areas, but I imagine this track will sound fine when I go back here and kind of check out the quieter areas with what I've done with the limiting. Okay, so you kind of see it. The mastering does hold up in this case. I was actually this is the second time I recorded this video because I actually just got my screen like 2 hours ago. Oh, sorry about that. So so I was like, oh man, now I could re-record the video for this week and actually get it in 1080p for you guys. And also Dava had just sent me this track. So I decided I was going to redo it so I could do his track instead of my track. But when I was doing my track, I had one of those parts that it was very smooth sounding. There wasn't a lot of high end. It was mostly just bass and mids. And then the digital clipping that I had done, really, you could hear the clipping. And it was kind of occasionally throughout the sub that was just kind of go. So you could really tell that, and I had to tone down the amount of clipping I was doing. But in this track, it's actually fine. And also I want to say shout out for Dava. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. It's either Dava or Dava or something like that. I think it's Dava. But shout out to him. Thank you so much for sending me this track so I could kind of do a video on it, and hopefully some other people send me tracks too. That's your cue. So that I could get some variety in these videos here, and we could have a whole bunch of different styles and how to master those and stuff like that. But this is his original mix, Club Life. And also, I really want to make one comment on this. When I first heard it, I wasn't too impressed, but that's kind of partially because it was unmastered. But going in, now that's been mastered just a little bit and we have some limiting on it, I want to make one shout out to how he is doing awesome. His stereo placement and dynamics are amazing. I mean, just listen. When you go down to this area right here, just listen. That is just gorgeous. He really, all the different drums are just sitting in the right place, and it gives you a sense that there's more than just music playing. Everything has a placement, and it's really dynamic, it's punchy, and especially over here too, everything, it doesn't feel like everything's blended. It feels like everything has its own spot in the mix. It's really good. So great job, Dava. I really like this track. I really like the way you did your dynamics and stereo placement. So just shout out to him. Thank you so much for sending me this track to do. I really enjoyed doing some of the master for this track. I will send you a finished master, but just keep in mind this isn't the finished one. I am actually going to do a full master for you. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want to check out Dava's SoundCloud, it is linked down below in the description. That's one thing that I promise I'll put a link for down there. So you could he's got some pretty awesome stuff, actually. I really like some of his ambient stuff. But anyway, he's got some great stuff. Check him out. He's pretty cool. He does, I think he does, oh gosh, I can't remember all the styles he does. He does a variety of styles. Most of them are more of the ambient style. Some of them are, I think some of them are hip hop. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he does a couple styles, and I really like some of the. Like I said, I really like his stereo placement and the way he mixes things in that regard. He does that really great. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like it if you liked it, and as always, actually a little more than usual, thank you so much for watching, because really you guys are the ones that made it so I could get this screen here, and you really made an impact in that regard. And now we can have full 1080p videos. Yay! So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.